you?
I'm very well, Sandra. How are you?
Very well. It's nice to see you again.
Very good to see you as well. Have you had a good year? It's been a year since we last spoke with each other.
It has been a good year. It has been a very good year. My book came out. My
Yeah,
daughter just got married last weekend.
lovely. You've had a lot of celebrations then.
Lots,
Ah,
lots.
wonderful. Well, normally we talk about creativity, and this year we're going to be talking about creativity applied to sustainable development, which are goals that touch everyone's lives in some form or shape. So I was going to ask you, like, which of those goals are the most important for you in the work that you do as an educator?
Well, of course, education comes up there, in the 17 goals. I think certainly education and reduced inequality certainly scream off the page to me as an educator. Um, but I think, obviously all of the goals are laudable goals. I think some of the challenge for me is in looking at this as something that is effective for everyone. Um, and I noticed that in each of the goals on the website, um, it says when you click into the goal, it says everyone can help make sure that we meet the global goals. But then the targets aren't stated in a way that is realistic to expect, just the ordinary human to take action on. And so I think the thing that's most challenging to me about this, even though I think that all of these goals are incredibly important, it seems to take our shared goals, values, and abilities for granted, and I think that we're so um, inundated with information that I think that doesn't equate to awareness. And the challenge that we have is with meeting some of these goals. How do we even ensure that the entire global community is even aware of the need for these goals, let alone the goals and the targets and ways to take action as individuals?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I remember being in the States back in, I think it was 1990. I was there for 2 summers, 1990, 1992. And I remember we were at this camp where we were looking at sustainable development back in those days. And I remember getting a book called 50 Ways You Can Recycle, just a small paperback, 50 Ways You Can Recycle. And I remember bringing it back. And in London, it's like no one was interested in that. That was like early 1990s. No one was interested in recycling. And now everyone has at least heard of the concept of recycling. You know,
mhm.
30 years ago, we didn't dream of like sorting out our litter so that we put the plastics in one box and whatever. And now it's become kind of common practice for the majority, I would say. So when you talk about goals that we or things that we can do at an individual level, maybe it's not stated as like smart goals, as it were, but even these small actions can lead to huge changes, can't they?
Yeah, and I think that that's my challenge with the goals. The way that they're communicated is that the targets within them are gigantic. They're sort of goals within goals, and even when it says, like I said, that everyone can help and use these targets to do. The targets are gigantic. They're like beyond the scope of what most of us on the planet can actually do without stopping our day job and starting an action committee or something, so I think that it's a challenge. The first challenge to me seems to be raise global awareness of the need for each of these things, and develop some kind of global community, because I think now that we have global interaction at our fingertips, like you and I are across the world from one another.
Mhm.
And so this is beautiful and it's wonderful, but it gives us the illusion of community and that shared activity together. And so for me, what this is, when I knew we were going to be talking about this, what this has done for me is really spur my thinking about I'm all about, respecting everyone's genius and everyone's participation in the answers to the challenges. And so I'm really pondering, how do we do that? How do we honor the value of every single individual to participate in this forward movement, and not just rely on the UN to figure it out, and people whose day job is that to clean the water or create the clean sanitation practices or the sustainable communities. The rest of us are going about what we need to do during a day, but are we thinking about our brothers and sisters beyond our nuclear family, beyond are we thinking of community as a global community? And I think what all of these goals point out is that the need is literally worldwide. There isn't a continent, there isn't a country, there isn't a city um, that isn't impacted by all of these and doesn't need all of these things to be accomplished. But we don't have buy-in or even awareness on an individual level. And so how do we do that?
Mhm. Yeah, I suppose these these 17 goals, they were there was a consensus about the importance of these particular goals at the nation level. And
Mhm.
so, maybe it can seem a little bit overwhelming how big these goals are, because these goals are meant to be tackled at the state level. And the reason I'm having these conversations with people like yourself is because there is a need for these discussions to happen at the non-expert level, because very, very often there's a tendency to leave these things to the experts who know. Even when I was inviting people to take part in these discussions, I had messages saying, oh, but I'm not an expert in that. And then I had to kind of explain, well, I'm not looking for experts, because they have different conversations to the kind of conversations that you and I will have as professionals. And
Mhm.
so it's about normalizing it. It's about making these goals not kind of like so way out there that let other people deal with them, because we are, each one of us is responsible for thinking about it. And you talk about goals, and maybe it's not goals, it's values, because there's a difference, isn't there? Like
Yeah.
maybe we just need to see things differently rather than striving for the goals, because if we see things differently, the behavior kind of sometimes it follows on naturally from a different mindset, doesn't it?
And I think it falls to each of us to presume that it's a shared responsibility, and to start asking each other these questions, just as you're doing, because you're right, we're not experts in climate change or sustainability, but we are experts in education, creativity, and innovation. And so that is what is required here. Is I think one of the goals, if I'm not mistaken, is it does have industry, innovation, and infrastructure. So the word innovation is in there, but it's about leadership, and at this level, it's the national leadership, um, global leadership, communicating in a way that puts everyone in that shared leadership position, that I think we're so used to relying on the experts. And we are so used to abdicating our responsibility for that, that that's the shift that needs to happen, that every single individual is looked at in a leader in their as a leader in their own life,
Absolutely.
that
Because we're leaders in terms of making decisions in our household. You're a leader in your family. You're a leader because you make choices about where you go shopping, what you buy, what you cook. So even at that level, like if I choose to eat avocados every day, eating avocados every day, it has an impact on the climate, because avocados take a huge amount of water and deforestation, because in so many South American countries, there's ecological damage being done simply because people like myself are choosing to eat more avocados than we need because it's considered to be a superfood. So you see, that's leadership in terms of, well, what choices am I going to make? Am I going to be eating like more than I need of avocados, knowing that it has this consequence on the environment, or am I going to choose to eat something different?
But see, you've identified that education piece very clearly. Most people that are eating avocados don't know that. They don't know the impact that avocados is having. It's very interesting. My two of my kids were just up staying with me from San Diego, and they are pathological intense recyclers, and they are profoundly aware of water quality, and they're thinking of it constantly. I have the water filtration system in my house. I have the recycle bin. I do but I am not as moment to moment aware of it as they are, because in their community, those are real dangerous things not to do. And so I think, it goes back to what you mentioned before about, it's really not so much our goals are aligned with our values. They're aligned with what's challenging our life. And most of the people, I would actually be willing to bet, most of the people that overeat avocados don't have any awareness whatsoever that it's damaging anything.
That's right, because they think they're doing good. They think, oh, I'm a vegan.
Right.
And I'm not eating meat, and I'm not eating all these factory farm eggs and whatever. I'm eating avocados. And as you say, sometimes it's like we think we're striving towards a goal, but without the education, we might be doing even more damage than we were previously.
Yeah. So I would love one of these goals to be a shared global awareness of impact, that there is that each of our actions is so impactful, even the tiny things, and that awareness of that impact is, I think, a profound necessity. We are insular, in very unique ways. And now we can select our, we can select our news. We can get things to reinforce whatever our perspective is. So if I wanted to go out and find some information that let me feel good about eating avocados, because I am a vegan, right? And so if I wanted that to usurp or to overshadow the potential impact on somebody else far, far away, I could do that. If that were within my value system, if I were putting my personal health above the global health, and that is where my values fall, then I could do that. We have that ability now. And so it's almost like we have the ability to reinforce whatever perspective we are choosing to have.
Mhm.
And that becomes that's what makes us in this sort of me and the other kind of mindset now, which I think makes it makes the gender equality, the reduced inequalities kind of goals, difficult to have everyone see as aligned with their values at the same level.
Yeah,
Because
because when we're talking about equalities, it's very contextual, isn't it? So, for example, somebody who lives in a village in India may, in terms financially, in terms of exchange rates, they might seem to be a lot poorer than somebody who lives in a in a small house in New York, for example, or a small flat. Materially, like financially, on paper, it might seem as though the person who lives in a village in India is a lot poorer. But when we look at the quality of their lives, the quality of the air that they breathe, the quality of the food that they eat, it's like you can't compare these things without taking the context into consideration. The reason I mention this is that a lot of people think, oh, the US is a good place to go to be well fed, basically, that you will get a job, you'll earn enough to put food on your table. But the fact is that from the statistics that I've been hearing about, over half of the population in the US is obese, which is kind of like a starvation in itself, isn't it? Ill health, related to obesity. Why are people obese? Because they're not getting the nourishment that they need from the food. So it's very bad quality food that they're eating, even though they can eat loads of it, but it's loads of bad food.
right, and their lives are filled with a stress because it's actually not easy in this country to find a job sometimes, and if you find that job, is it going to actually put food on the table, or are you going to have to choose between heat and food? Healthcare, for instance, in this country is abominable. The access to healthcare insurance and the access to affordable healthcare, it's scary for a lot of people. And we're having a homeless crisis in almost every city of any size, not just the major cities, but any city of any size has a significant homeless population. And so there are, I think that again, it's not about one country having a better handle on anything than any other country. Every nation has profound challenges, and it's just like, out of these 17 goals, some of them rank higher in their challenges in certain communities than others. But it is about respecting. I think we in the Western world tend to look at underdeveloped countries as feeling that they are somehow less than, and those people aren't feeling a hardship from the things that we would consider a hardship. Do you know what I mean? But they are profoundly impacted by us eating more avocados.
Yeah. I mean, think about the Amish, for example, in Pennsylvania. They live very simple lives. They choose to live simple lives, eating organic food. And when I visited them, I didn't think that there was poverty there at all. They were very well to do. They make their own furniture. The furniture is really high quality carpentry, and they have simple lives, but not poor lives. But they're still affected by pollution. They're still affected by the war in Ukraine. That's going to have an impact on their lives, regardless of like how far away we are from it. So there is this interconnectedness. I mean, we here in the UK, we saw that very dramatically when our ex-Prime Minister Truss, she had these policies that were outrageous, basically, and it crashed the markets, and so we had to change Prime Minister. That was a dramatic illustration of how none of us are free to make choices willy-nilly, just because we feel like it. We feel like saying, oh, let's cut the taxes for the highly rich, because it's like, well, you might want to do that, and you might have a few politicians who support that idea, but globally, economically, we're all interlinked, and you're not going to be allowed to do that in the way that you might think, even though we're out of the European Union now and all of that. So you see, that's kind of, for me, that was a very dramatic illustration of like, look, this is how interconnected we are. The coronavirus also showed us how interconnected we are. Like a very tiny little virus in one part of the world can have a huge consequence all around the world, right?
Absolutely. And I think that you're right. Coronavirus was an excellent, is an excellent teacher for just how interconnected and interdependent we are. You know, I think about the Amish. One factory could obliterate the Amish communities in this country if they were tainting the water supply that flowed to that community, because yes, they're leading very simple life and it's organic food, but if the water becomes filled with lead, all bets are off. And that can happen from the decision of one person in a particular company that decides, oh, well, I need to up profits this year, so I can't spend that much money cleaning that water, and it just goes downstream anyway. And those are the considerations that I think there is an egocentric perspective that we need to shift. And I think inviting, as you're doing, inviting everyone into the conversation so that we don't feel like these goals are up there and they're so far away and they've got to be somebody else's responsibility because this is overwhelming, and how can I help somebody in South Africa or somebody in Ukraine even? What can I actually do? And now we also have the question, with all of this information flying around all the time, we also have the question of, am I being told the truth? What's real? What's not? What's honest? What's not? And so discussion and getting back to the ability to respect each other's integrity, that we mean what we say and that we are willing to take responsibility for our actions, thoughts, every action, word, and deed, that it's our personal responsibility, everything that we do, from throwing away plastic to a landfill rather than recycling it, to just the way that we treat our neighbors and respect what their perspective is.
Yeah, that's right. And what you've said, it links back again to quality education, that nowadays we do, in terms of being ethical, we do have to question everything that we're fed from the media. And if we don't question it, we could fall foul of thinking, assuming things simply because we've been persuaded with the propaganda one way or the other, and we haven't bothered to think for ourselves. Each one of us can be manipulated simply because of our presence on social media.
Absolutely. And I think that you bring up an interesting point with the way our education system works too, because a lot of times that questioning is educated out of us. That the convenient way to educate people is to have everybody sit down and internalize the information that's given to them and be able to pass a test on it, and that's education. And we're not, in many school systems, at least in this country, certainly we are not teaching people to think for themselves. We're not teaching them to question and challenge and prove out for themselves. We're teaching them to succeed by sitting down, listening to somebody else's opinion, being able to share that back, and that's education.
Yes, because it's very difficult to assess a student's work when it's unexpected. So teachers will have these criteria, and if because I think I've spoken about this before with you, like when I was doing my initial research on creativity, I read some papers which demonstrated, these were quite old papers, one by Jackson and somebody, and Gretzel and Jackson, I think it was, and their research demonstrated that teachers prefer students who score highly on the intelligence scale as opposed to scoring highly on the creativity scale. The reason being that those who, who score highly on the high intelligence thing, they're intelligent enough to know what the teacher wants and to give the teacher what they want. But the creative person, they tend to go their own way. They tend to, have a very kind of different view of the world, and they have different answers. And so when they're not giving the teacher what the teacher is expecting or what they want, the teacher doesn't know what to do with it. And so the easiest thing for them to do is say, well, that doesn't meet the criteria, and they won't get as good a grade as the person who's given exactly what was expected.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have had this conversation before about disruptors, and also about what do you do with that highly creative child in the classroom that, I've got another idea, or I'm more interested in looking at leaves and dirt than I am in writing this English essay. How do you convert that into a teaching opportunity for everyone to expand their knowledge in that process? And I think what is happening is we're teaching people not to speak up with their idea. And I believe that every answer to every problem is here on the planet. Somebody's got it. The problem is, are we going to hear it? Because did we teach them to shut up and sit down and, drive a taxi all week long or whatever? And they might be the Einstein that didn't get nurtured, the genius that nobody listened to. Because me, I believe everybody's a genius, that it's not that there's a shortage of the genius, it's that we have a reluctance to offer it because we're afraid of how it's going to be responded to, and we have a resistance to accepting it if it doesn't come in the package that we expect it to.
Yeah.
And so IQ is just one measure of genius, and a creative genius can really bring that brand new innovation, that offer that hasn't been made. And we just aren't, why can't we get the answer from a 14-year-old? Why can't we solve the problem, with somebody who is viewed as developmentally delayed, but they see an aspect of the world that we don't see?
Absolutely. And this leads us to the partnerships aspect. I find that nowadays, I'm hoping that this isn't just simply an illusion, but there's more and more focus on collective genius rather than individual genius, that there's more of a focus on co-creation of knowledge. And this co-creation of knowledge is when we do have people of different ages, different abilities, different skills, different backgrounds, different cultures. We bring people together and value the fact that everyone will see things in a slightly different way. And so no one's a genius on their own, but they're genius because they're part of a group that, that kind of sees more widely than they would on their own.
And that completely coincides with my practice for teaching, that it's all about making the other person look good. It's about sharing with your other player, and acting in a way that supports their performance in the moment, and getting your mind off of yourself. How do I look? How do I sound? But sharing. And what I was just glancing very quickly at these targets under that goal 17 about the partnerships. And again, I come back to the fact that the way this is stated here, it's the ways in which we do that, even though it says, everyone can help to make sure that we meet the global goals, use these 19 targets to create action for partnerships for the goals. Even me, who, I can be pretty, active as an activist and stay involved in things. And I have a huge entrepreneurial, streak, and these seem daunting, they even seem daunting, some of them, in terms of just understandability. What is, the targets seem like a gigantic goal within the goal. And so I I would think that our job as individuals, who are involved in education and creativity and innovation and leadership, is to lead in every moment, and lead not only by example, but by inclusion, to bring everyone into the leadership position. Because as you said a little while ago, we all are leaders in our own lives.
Mhm.
And it's the acknowledgement of that and accepting the responsibility. And I always hyphenate response ability. We have the ability to respond, and we need to each take ownership of that and say, yeah, I can choose. I may not be able to, stop the global consumption of too many avocados, but I can choose to limit them in my own life. I can choose where I get mine from, and really look into, where is my food coming from, and what is the impact my food is having. It's the same thing with almonds. I am a vegan. I eat a lot of almonds. Where are those almonds coming from? And how much did it cost the planet for my bag of almonds?
Mhm. Yeah.
Um,
Well, when I look at partnerships, I think about families, thinking about at the local level. For me, partnerships is about families, it's about friendships. And I have a student who uh, he sets up these projects for his wife. His wife and their children, they go out collecting litter and picking out those shopping trolleys from streams. Like, people, for some reason, they seem to enjoy pushing those trolleys into streams. I don't know why people do that, but they go out and that's like a family project. And so they get to spend quality time with each other. They're walking, they're enjoying fresh air, and at the same time they're doing something for the planet. And I'm thinking of doing things in the community with friends, so it's just a way to spend some quality time with my friends, and at the same time we're doing something good as well. So partnerships doesn't have to be at the overwhelming level of, like, at the nation level. It can simply be, because here in England, we hear a lot on the news about communities that have got together on these litter picking initiatives, and they go around the motorways with their little bags, and and collect litter from, they adopt motorways and things like that. And so there's scope for people to do this, and it links in with the well-being as well, because we, in cities especially, we live lives where we can easily feel isolated. Especially if we're working from home, we feel isolated. And so well-being, we have to kind of like balance out spending, not spending so much time on our own. That's a good way to link up with friends, and at the same time do something which is beneficial for everyone as well.
yeah, you bring up a beautiful point. Like, I wasn't even thinking about that. Like, my daughters have been raised to always, we'll go on blanket excursions, or go, when it gets cold, or we'll go take water bottles out to, people on the street, or we'll go in the holidays, go buy a bunch of stuffed animals and go to care centers for elders, and give everybody a stuffed animal, which always is a profound experience for them, because nobody's given them a stuffed animal in forever. And it's just nice to get. And you can, if you're looking at, how can I just make the world a better place to be today? If we can get everyone looking at that, if we can just, bring that about on a moment to moment basis, what have you done to make the planet better today? If that's the discussion around the dinner table, that would be wonderful. Rather than, what did you do today? What did you do to make the planet a better place today?
Yeah. Yes, I mean, like, during the pandemic, I was like watching the news, and I would see all these people going out feeding the homeless and whatever. And I did ask myself that question: well, what can I do apart from going out and delivering food, and like all of these things. And I thought, well, maybe I can do more of like this, building bridges across different communities. And because that also, there is value in building relational bridges, isn't there?
Mhm. Yeah, you're doing it right now. Just this idea of getting us all talking about that, especially those of us that were thinking in that reactionary way of, wait, that's not my, that's not my area. To get us all recognizing that it's all of our areas. We all have this responsibility, and we all have ownership. This is where we live, this planet. And the better it gets for any of us, the better it gets for all of us, in terms of the sustainability.
Yeah.
And I'm getting right on the edge of that, time when I'm going to start having grandkids. My kids have not had children young, so they're, but they're all rapidly approaching 30. So that's a time where, I think about, I've actually got grandchildren, and I just can't, I personally, like, I can't even watch a movie where a child is scared or hurt, or, I can't do it. I don't want any children on the planet to ever be scared, hungry, hurt, and so for me, starting those conversations and making sure that I am doing the best I can to contribute to, okay, if that's a priority for me, if that's where my values are, I want children to feel safe and well. Then, okay, how can I step out of my comfort zone and be doing that every day? And whenever we're talking to each other, if we can hold each other accountable to be taking action, inspired action in alignment with our values, instead of having our values and sitting on the couch eating Cheetos, watching somebody on television try to make our values come to life in the world.
Yes, and I've heard of some indigenous tribes from the US when they say that to judge whether a decision is a good decision or not, they think about the impact it will have 7 generations down the line, right? I don't
Oh,
know
yeah.
what tribe it
Yeah.
is, but so when you have grandchildren, you're thinking about their future. You're thinking, well, when my grandchild is 20, what kind of world will they be living in? And what I'm doing now, will they kind of will they be critical of what I've done now, and left them to clear up the mess, basically, or will they be proud of what I've done? So
Mhm.
it's like that long-term thinking, isn't it? And so I think a lot of these inequalities and a lot of the crises are the consequences of short-term thinking. People
Yeah.
think of their 5-year plans. Let me make my company successful, so in 5 years time we'll be making X amount of profit, without thinking about, well, what about in 50 years time?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And I think, we can get, we can think, I hear people all the time say, well, that doesn't really affect me. That isn't really part, that's not really a problem for me. And, I think your reflection is beautiful. I mean, would you want to be 50 years from now, when you're no longer on the planet, would you be happy standing beside the ramifications of whatever you did? If we literally, if it's not just being judged at the pearly gates, but if we literally had to stand beside whatever we have created in perpetuity, would we be proud of it?
Yeah, and I think that when you have your grandchildren, with your, thinking about your children's future and your grandchildren's future and your great grandchildren's future, it becomes easier to imagine and to empathize with that, perhaps, but it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, I don't have children. I have nephews and nieces, and so I think about their children, and but even it's bigger than that. I'm just thinking, like yourself, I'm thinking about all children.
Mhm.
They will be looking back at these times, and I mean, already, like people like Greta Thunberg, they're very angry. They're
Yeah.
very angry with the adults and what we've done.
Yeah. Yeah. And the adults that came before us, and sort of, taught us that this was okay. And it wasn't malicious. It was just, not forward thinking, it was not thinking about what was going to be the impact. And if there is anything about these global goals, it's the that is universally important. I think it's the awareness of the impact of our choices, even the tiny ones. What are you doing with that plastic bottle? What are you doing with that? Are you sticking 97 napkins in the bag when you're the person at the window in the drive-through? What is happening? And are we just automatically giving ketchup packets to people that aren't going to use them? They're going to throw them away, or they're going to sit in a drawer and rot, or whatever. It's those kinds of wasteful choices that we all make constantly. And even our choices about simple things, bringing up bodily functions. How many times do you flush the toilet? What do you do in your practices during the day that are having long-reaching consequences that you're just not noticing? Because we weren't, as a global community, we were not raised that way. We weren't raised to be aware. And so I think the primary thing that needs to be done is awareness needs to be raised, not only of the issues, but of what each and every human being can do. And that we each have the ability, we can logic it out. We can figure out, if I've been doing this all this time, if I just make this little shift, but I think that also people think, oh, well, it's not going to make that big of an impact right now. So part of that awareness raising is increasing the understanding of, yeah, throwing away that one plastic bottle may not have a big impact, but if we could see somehow what all those bottles and cans added up to in a single human being's lifetime, who is not an overuser of bottles and cans, but just the average, what does that impact look like? I'm sure it looks horrific if it were trying to be housed in your house,
So let's link this with well-being, Sandra, because the reason I say this is that there is obviously, we have to think about this in a broader sense, because I've seen a lot of people who hoard things in their homes, right? They hoard things like plastic bottles that they're never going to use, and old magazines, and and that has a negative impact on their well-being. There's lots of programs on TV where they go to clutter clear, people's homes, because they've simply kind of like saved everything. So it's not simply about holding on to things. We have to reuse those things and share those things and recycle those things, and at each level, like not simply putting those plastic bottles into the recycling box for them to be thrown away. And you see, again, it's like, I've heard stories that when we kind of make so much time and use so much time and effort to sort out the litter, it actually just gets dumped in the sea, or in countries like in Africa, it gets taken to Africa and then just put in landfills there. And so that can be very demoralizing. It's like, well, we're just taking the problem from one place and making a bigger problem somewhere else. And so how do we avoid getting depressed with all of this? And there is research coming out to say that, people who are vegetarians, for political reasons, they may end up being depressed. And maybe that depression comes because they feel so overwhelmed with social concerns and social issues that their well-being takes a toll.
Mm-hmm. I think, again, it goes back to that inundated with information piece, that we have so many choices to make now, that it used to be simpler. The Amish community and the way that they live, it is a simpler lifestyle, but it reduces stress in a way, because because you're not being asked to make so many decisions. And I think, interestingly, as much as I've already said that, we have this egocentric perspective that can tend to make us disregard others, we need a level of respect for our own well-being. If we each are looking at ourselves as, how do I sustain the highest quality of life, not the wealthiest, not the, better than Fred, next door kind of life, but how do I sustain the highest level of well-being in myself? What are the choices I can make for getting enough rest, for eating properly, for getting exercise, for getting fresh air? And then when you start to look at those things that you need and taking them seriously, as again, nothing against Cheetos, but the bag of Cheetos on the couch might feel like it's stress reducing, but it's not. It's putting a lot of stresses on your system. So when you are really looking at your own well-being first, you can't help but increase the well-being and sustainability of the planet. Because if we are all looking at, what do I truly need? What is true comfort? What is true health? How do if I'm looking at, does my well-being include access to healthcare? Whoops, there isn't access to healthcare. Okay, so how do I need to change my behavior in terms of the ways that I show up in the community to increase that, not just for myself, but for everyone else? How do I ensure, maybe it's that I start growing food if I want to, increase my access to healthy food. The possibilities, if we're willing to look at, how do I do the best to support my own well-being and the well-being of my family, not just the comfort escapist from the lack of well-being, but true well-being, then by almost a natural growth and, the natural attrition, we will start to move into where we are helping everyone by helping ourselves.
Something, it's like, again, that goes back to the quality of education as well. Now, I consider myself to be highly educated because I've been in education all my life, and I've done a lot of personal development work as well. And yet there are serious flaws in the quality of education that I've received, because 3 years ago I was diagnosed as being diabetic, and I had no idea how to overcome or to reverse that diabetes, as it were. It took me more than 2 years, about 2.5 years it took me to figure out what I could do in terms of my diet to manage the diabetes. Now, I think 2.5 years of like experimenting and finding out for myself is quite a long time. But I was never taught. There's a lot of diabetic people, but we are never taught at school how to avoid diabetes in the first place, and that it's a diet-related chronic illness which can easily be avoided if we don't overeat, for example, if we eat what is good for us. But then I realized that for the most part of my life, I've been overeating. Even though I'm thin, I've still been overeating, and I've been eating things which are clearly not good for me, but I didn't have any symptoms, so I carried on overeating. Now, what does that do to the planet, when so many of us, we simply drink and eat, much more than we need, simply because we can afford it? There's something quite unethical in that as well, isn't there?
Yeah, I have as you're well aware, I just released my book, Spontaneous Brilliance, and there was a chapter in that that's now turning into its own book called The Morality of Convenience, that I think that our biggest challenge is that most of us have been raised to develop a morality of convenience. You know, we think that the best thing is the disposable fork, so we don't have to take it and wash it, you know, and we're taught to throw away everything that isn't useful. And the problem is, well, there are multiple problems with that, but one of them is that there are profoundly inconvenient people. You know, there are inconvenient people that are elders. There are inconvenient people that are children with disabilities. There are inconvenient people that are children in foster care. There are inconvenient people and inconvenient processes, and we eat badly out of convenience. You know, we need fast food. We need that to be able to be eaten while we're driving, while we're, you know, and so this challenge of the morality of convenience that we have, that we've created a disposable world, and that does not benefit us. We can see on every level that is creating these issues that we now need global goals to solve. You know, it's all about the choices we have made out of convenience that are now coming back to bite us and are completely insustainable if we are to continue to exist. And if we can look at the well-being choice before we look at the convenient, easy choice, you know, exercise in this day and age is rarely convenient. You know, we have to make space for it in our world in order to be healthy. And the loop that comes in just exercise, as an example, is the loop that happens to us in every other category as well. If we don't exercise because it's inconvenient, or, you know, we just get distracted with other things, or we're stressed and we don't take the time, whatever the reason, the more we don't exercise, the worse we feel. And once we reach a certain level of feeling bad, then exercise really feels bad instead of good. And so once we reach that level where exercising feels bad, most of us, we aren't educated to know that once you work past that point, you will feel better, you know, that all of those aches and pains go away with more exercise, although they may feel like they're exacerbated in the initial stages of getting back to that exercise. And so I think that brings us back to the fact that the education piece is critical.
Absolutely.
It's
Yeah.
where the awareness comes from. If we understand what we're doing, then, and we really understand the impact, and we can reason it for ourselves, if we're not just educated with a bunch of statistics, but we're educated with a real understanding of the impact and how we can analyze the situation for its impact ongoing in our lives, each as individuals, then I think we can really affect sustainable change.
Yeah, I think I can't remember which who this quote is attributed to. It could be to Gandhi, but I'm not sure. But I've heard it several times. There's a quote saying that in the world there's enough food to meet everyone's need, but not everyone's greed. See, that makes a lot of sense. And so
Yes.
I was saying earlier about, you know, I realized that I've spent most of my life overeating simply because for pleasure, basically eating for pleasure rather than eating because I needed the sustenance, basically. And if, you know, there's 7 billion people like myself, you know, who are eating a lot for simply pleasure, when we can get pleasure from different things. It doesn't have to be through food. We could have pleasure simply by walking in the park, for example. That could give us as much pleasure if we were educated to find pleasure in those things which don't cost anything, that don't take away the resources, rather than turning to chocolates and donuts.
Right. And most of us in the Western world, we equate going out to dinner as a form of entertainment. And you know, when we're stressed, what do? We want to sit down and have some chocolate, you know. When we feel like we need energy, we don't go get on a treadmill, we get some coffee, and we get some coffee that's really expensive because it's too inconvenient to make it in our own house, um, when I stopped, I have to admit to a true Starbucks addiction, and not for coffee, but for green tea, total, for years. And it is amazing the financial shift of not going there and making just green tea in my house. You would think I have lots of letters and degrees after my name, and the amount of years it took me to stop being a devotee of that convenience and say, it takes me 3 seconds to go in there and pull the tea bag out. I used to think I had to drive to Starbucks, and I spent years. I had started a company. I had a partner in the company. We were both addicted to the same green tea. So we would literally spend money from the company to have somebody on the staff go get everybody Starbucks, because of our addiction. And it's really interesting to me how easy it is. I mean, that sounds over the top, but it was just part of the daily practice,
Yeah.
and it's amazing to me that I've been a vegan and very whole foods oriented since 1983. And yet I could wander off into that. And how many plastic cups did I generate the use of, so it's looking at, as you say, it's looking at that impact. And if you don't have children, you don't have grandchildren, attached to something that you care about, your legacy, something that will take you into that future mindset. What is the impact of what I'm doing right now?
Yeah. Thinking about your green tea, when I lived in London, I used to travel to work on the tube, you call that metro, and I didn't like traveling on the tube. So I used to get 2 pastries every morning, 2 pastries full of butter, full of sugar to eat on the tube. And then I wondered why I had a bloated belly. So you see, it's like, again, it's to do with education and well-being. It's like I didn't put, well, of course, like I suppose it was just denial. I knew why I had a bloated belly, but I was in denial. I didn't want to give up making that tube journey easier with all the sugar fixes and whatever. But it's to do with, you were talking earlier about, we don't know where our things come from. We buy clothes, we don't know where these clothes come from. We buy food, we don't know where it comes from. Thinking about those pastries, the sugar, where did the sugar come from? Did it come from the West Indies? If it came from the West Indies, who planted it? Who was working under minimum wages to manufacture that sugar? How was it transported to England? And all the energy that was lost in that transportation. So you see, even the decision to eat a donut or whatever, we have to think we've lost touch with where these things are produced and who planted the seeds for those, avocados, who planted the seed, who looked after that tree while it was growing, who watered it, who picked the fruit, and who packaged it, who transported it, who put it into our shops. And all of those things, we kind of like that convenience, or we think about it's like, well, I just got it from the local food shop, but that's not where it grew.
Yeah. And that's a brilliant point, because the whole drive for locally made, there's a difference between locally grown and locally made, if because like you say, where did the sugar come from? Where did the flour come from? Where did, the beef come from? Whatever it is, where did the bike parts come from? Where did the, even the paint, where did it come from? And when we think about those things, like I find tattoos a really scary thing, but my kids love tattoos, and they have a very big process of where they mark important things in their life on their arms. So I have two daughters that very much do that. And so when they were younger and it was getting to the age where I could no longer say, no, you can't, then what I did is I started investigating, how do you know where the ink comes from? How do you know which are inks with, does the place create their own inks, or do they? And I did this bucket load of research, but I did it not because I was curious about tattoos, but because I was really desperate to protect the well-being of my children. And so that goes back to that thing again of like, where does it come from? What do you really know? And what is the distance between your convenience marker and your true well-being marker? And those things, like if I'm worried that my kids are going to have some negative impact down the line from these inks, then I'm suddenly energized to find out about it. But I wasn't when there were droves of people walking into all these, there are bazillion tattoo parlors around. I didn't pay any attention to it until I became really concerned for my own kids. And so, we need to, as you say, if you don't have children, or you don't, whatever it is, let's encourage each other to find a future thinking sense of morality and values for ourselves. What are our choices that we're making today doing to the impact of the future world?
Yes, and I think things like compassion and empathy, maybe those are the kind of those feelings and those values need to be center stage in this. It's like, because if we live from the point of feeling compassion for the whole world rather than simply our own families, then our actions, our behaviors would create those ripple effects where there is more equality, because the choices we make have a positive impact on others.
Absolutely. My graduate thesis in directing was written on Arthur Miller's play All My Sons. And that play has always stood out to me. A lot of times people will say Death of a Salesman is a great American tragedy. I disagree completely. I think that play is rather pathos, but All My Sons is the literal great American tragedy, because this is a man who sacrificed his family on the altar of the American dream, who literally, his life became the embodiment of the question, which is more our responsibility, the nuclear family or our responsibility of the family of man? And because of a choice that he made that would impact people he would never know and he would never see, to keep his family sustained, he essentially was responsible for the deaths of pilots that went out with, airplane parts that weren't safe. And he knew they weren't safe, but if he'd pulled them, his company would have failed. And how do we all ask ourselves, what is our responsibility to the greater family of mankind, humankind, beyond our nuclear family? If we bring our nuclear family to a higher awareness of that global community, then I think we're serving the future well. We have a responsibility to help each other have a global perspective, have that community sense. We have a responsibility to make sure that everyone that we come in contact with experiences our values. Do you know what I'm saying? I'm not sure that was clear, but to share our values, not by telling them to people, but by living in a way that that helps other people see what's important to us, what's truly important to us.
Yes.
And if we're not proud of what we're demonstrating is important to us, then it's on us to shift till we are proud of it.
Yes. Yeah, because as you were talking, you reminded me of Mother Teresa, Mother Teresa, she represented compassion, and so her behavior was driven by this desire to demonstrate, express compassion. And it also and so she, we can say, like, she was doing work that she loved because it demonstrated her values. And there's a famous quote by Khalil Gibran, who says, he said, if you don't love the work that you're doing, it's better that you go and beg for alms from someone who does love what they're doing. That's powerful, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Because we are here to have a beautiful time. If we're not having a beautiful time, then we need to shift the way we're showing up. And there is it's about transcending the obstacles, not ignoring the obstacles. It's about how do we see that obstacle before us and push up against it so that we grow. When I think of compassion, I always go back to what the Dalai Lama said in an event that I had the beautiful opportunity to direct and create. But he was in front of 8,000 kids, and these kids were able to ask him questions. And one young man said, you're here about compassion. This is a compassion day, but how is it that you have compassion for those people who drove you out of your country, and if you went back, they would kill you today? How can you have compassion for them? And he said, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said, it's easy to love someone that's easy to love. It's easy to have compassion for someone who is compassionate. But it's that person who their actions are so egregious and their behavior and treatment of you is so challenging that your heart has to grow in order for you to be able to show up compassionately. That's your sacred friend. And that's your great teacher. These challenges are opportunities for us to grow. They're not there to thwart us or hurt us. They're opportunities for us to grow, but we have to be willing to be educated by them.
And I think the Dalai Lama is an excellent example of that he's using those challenges as opportunities, because if he hadn't been evicted from his own country, he might not have been as visible as he is now.
Absolutely. 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 There is a gift in everything. There's a gift in all of these challenges that are facing us globally. There were gifts, and some people might be really offended by this. There were gifts in COVID. Yes. There was a lot that we learned if we choose to now act positively on that. Like you said early on, we learned how interconnected and interdependent we are through COVID. If we choose to adopt that education and take it in and now act on it with compassionate accountability. That's a phrase I use often when I work with people is compassionate accountability. We can understand what the challenges are, but we still have to hold ourselves accountable for our own inspired action to build on the situation. We have to continue to make offers into the situation, not just sit back and judge it.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful, Sandra. That's great. I've really enjoyed my conversation with you. That's been wonderful.